My name is Mason Crowley, and if you saw me today, gray coat, calm demeanor eyes that scan instead of speak, you'd probably assume I was just another silent office type. Invisible, the kind who gets passed over in meetings, forgotten in group chats, remembered only when the printer breaks. You'd be right about one thing. I am quiet, but quiet isn't weak. Quiet is storing everything they said, every smirk, every lie. Quiet is watching someone destroy you, only to build something stronger from the rubble. I wasn't always like this. There was a time, just a few years ago, when I still believed in friendship at work. I still thought loyalty mattered. That success could be shared, earned honestly with hard work and time. Then I met Elliot. He was loud in the way people mistake for leadership. Flashy watches, weekend ski trips, work hard, play harder slogans on his LinkedIn. I should have known better. But I was naive, ambitious, and worst of all, trusting. Elliot and I worked together at one of those high-rise firms, downtown, glass walls, fresh fruit in the break room, espresso machines, with names. I was a senior analyst. He was one step above, team manager. But our desks were close, and over late nights, tight deadlines, and mutual office complaints, we bonded. He started calling me Mace, told me I had a mind like a scalpel. Sharp, precise. Said I made him look good, and I believed him. We built presentations together. We uncovered financial risks that made the partners sit up. I even covered for him when he missed deadlines or data reviews. I thought we were a team, until I wasn't useful anymore. The moment it happened wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no betrayal in a dark parking garage. It was quiet, eerily efficient. On a Thursday morning, I walked into the office to find my badge deactivated. IT had already shut down my email. My desk cleaned. Security escorted me to HR like I was some kind of threat. The HR manager's words were memorized. Mason, due to discrepancies in the Q3 report and breaches of protocol, the firm has decided to terminate your employment effective immediately. Discrepancies, breaches. I blinked. I didn't, but they didn't care. And there, in the corner of the HR office, stood Elliot, watching, arms folded, not saying a word. But when our eyes met, he smirked. That smirk stayed with me longer than any pink slip, longer than the unemployment line, longer than the phone calls that went unanswered when I tried to explain myself to colleagues, to friends. Because that smirk meant one thing. He did this, and he was proud of it. For 2 months after that, I unraveled. I drank. I slept in until noon. I stopped checking job boards. My apartment turned into a mausoleum of old coffee cups and unopened mail. My parents stopped calling. My sister offered me money. I refused. But something snapped back into place the day I found the old USB. I was clearing out my laptop. I was going to sell it, maybe pawn it for rent. But there it was, plugged into the side like it had been waiting. I clicked it out of habit, not expectation. Inside were folders, shared drives from the firm. Presentations, memos, data tables, a few unfinished scripts. And then a folder titled Drafts EC Only, Elliot's initials. I opened it. And what I found, charts with altered numbers, spreadsheets with misreported losses, client reports padded to hide underperforming assets, and one document, just one saved in an older format. It was a memo with my name in the subject line, a mock draft of the very email that would be used to fire me, dated weeks before I was even let go. He planned it. He didn't just scapegoat me, he architected the entire downfall. And in his arrogance, he'd saved pieces of it like trophies. That night I didn't drink. I printed every file. I labeled each page. I pulled out old notebooks and started tracking timelines. The caffeine hit differently. My hands didn't shake. They wrote. I didn't know exactly what I was building yet, but I knew this much. I would never see justice if I waited for someone to hand it to me. If I wanted redemption, I'd have to make it myself. And maybe I could watch him fall just like I did. Except this time, I'd be the one smiling. Trust me, you'll regret skipping this part. So before you sit back and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. But only if you really like what I have to say here. Now get in the mood to listen to this story, because it might be the ultimate sweet revenge. The thing about falling hard is that you learn to stop looking up, at least for a while. I kept my head down after that discovery. Not from shame anymore, but from focus. The old version of me would have stormed into some lawyer's office, flung the USB on their desk, like a movie scene demanded justice. But that Mason was gone. This version of me, he planned. And I knew I needed 3 things: knowledge, patience, and proximity. So I took the lowest job I could find at a mid-sized law firm that specialized in corporate litigation. Not glamorous, not lucrative, but exactly what I needed. I started as a file clerk. No title, no benefits. No one cared who I was, which was perfect. For months, I fetched coffee-sorted evidence binders, redacted documents. But I was also watching, absorbing, learning how evidence was handled, how prosecutors structured cases, how courtroom strategy unfolded. Every time a white-collar case came in, I paid attention. Embezzlement, insider trading. Fraud. I didn't just file them, I read them. And with every page, I understood what Elliot had done a little better. He hadn't just sabotaged me, he'd broken serious laws: securities fraud, falsified records, misrepresentation to investors. The problem, he was good at hiding it. Too good for a casual whistleblower report to take him down. Too careful to leave fingerprints. But arrogance makes even smart men sloppy. And I knew Elliot couldn't help himself. One night, while working late voluntarily, I was organizing a deposition binder. The associate had left their case notes open on their laptop. It wasn't my business, but a name caught my eye. Anders and Goldstein Capital Partners. That was one of the accounts Elliot and I worked on. A big one. The kind of client that could swing millions in a day with one press release. Curious, I checked the file path. Case archive, internal whistleblower. Preliminary investigation. I memorized it, didn't touch it, didn't even glance again. But when I got home, I opened the USB again, dug deeper. Anders and Goldstein was in there. So were the inflated numbers we submitted. Suddenly, I had a connection. My old data aligned with a current investigation. Maybe the law firm didn't know about Elliot yet, but they were sniffing around the same trail he once walked. I started building my own version of the case. Every night, I laid out timelines. I connected emails, transaction logs, memos. I color-coded behavior patterns, predicted which of his missteps would matter most. I became obsessed. And strangely, I felt alive for the first time in a year. It was during this period I changed my name on LinkedIn, deleted old accounts, scrubbed my presence online. I didn't want Elliot or anyone from the firm to know I was alive, much less thriving. I even started dressing differently. Less corporate, more muted. I let the world forget me. And then I saw him again. It was a charity gala hosted by a partner at the firm. I wasn't supposed to attend, but I volunteered to help with logistics. Wear a name badge, hand out programs, refill drinks. There he was, Elliot, in a navy suit, laughing too loudly near the shrimp tower glass of champagne in hand. He hadn't changed. Still smug, still glowing like a man who thinks the world owes him applause. He didn't recognize me. Of course not. I wasn't Mason Crowley anymore. Just a nameless guy in black slacks with a clipboard. But I stood 10 feet from him and watched. Watched who he talked to, what he bragged about, how he joked with other executives about cooking the books like it was a badge of honor. That night, I wrote down every name he mentioned. Every company he claimed to streamline. Some were under federal scrutiny. Some were on my USB. One in particular had already appeared in 2 separate lawsuits I'd handled quietly for the firm. It was time. I requested to shadow an associate working on a similar case just to learn. The partner signed off. Why wouldn't they? I was invisible, diligent, quiet. While shadowing, I introduced an anonymous lead, an external tip with strong indications of accounting discrepancies tied to Elliot's name. The tip included a few innocuous documents, harmless by themselves. Enough to raise a brow, but not a red flag. I needed them to get curious, not suspicious of me, just curious enough to dig, and they did. Within weeks, emails started flying. Quietly. Internally, the lead attorney brought me in to review timelines. Fresh eyes, he said. He had no idea how familiar I was with every comma on those pages. And the deeper they looked, the more Elliot's name floated to the surface. I kept my distance. I stayed in the shadows. But behind the curtain, I was building something enormous. And Elliot was walking straight into it. You could feel it in the office. The kind of tension that doesn't scream, it hums. Quietly. Like an engine running just beneath your floor. Something had shifted. People were talking in corners. Partners were closing doors behind them more often. The receptionist started whispering when certain names came up on the call log, and somewhere in that low-frequency buzz, I heard it. Elliot Keene. My chest didn't tighten. I didn't feel fear. I felt ready. For the next few weeks, I doubled down, not just on gathering intel, but on making sure I stayed out of the spotlight. The plan wasn't just to see him go down, it was to ensure he never saw me coming. See, Elliot had always operated in daylight. He was the guy who patted backs too hard, who shouted over drinks that he could fix any mess with a spreadsheet and a smile. But me, I worked in shadows now. No fanfare, no fingerprints. Still no plan survives without one moment of chaos. And mine came on a rainy Tuesday, when my direct supervisor handed me a beige folder and said, "You'll want to see this." Inside were internal notes from a forensic accounting review. The pages bled with red ink and flagged discrepancies, several of them traced directly to Elliot's consultancy Keene Advisory, which had quietly ballooned after he left our old firm. The report cross-referenced funds managed under third-party shell companies, manipulated quarterly reports, and buried liabilities under fake marketing expenses. It was beautiful. It was exactly what I'd hoped would happen. But what chilled me was this. My name, Mason Crowley, appeared on one of the older flagged documents. A printout of a report from the original firm, signed off by me 3 years ago, back when I still worked under Elliot. They had it. They didn't know it yet. But the trail they were following would soon lead to a moment in the past, when I was still trying to be good, still playing by the rules. If they weren't careful, I'd look complicit. And if I didn't act fast, I might go down with him. I spent that night on my balcony, letting the rain soak through a thin shirt cigarette, burning in one hand and the USB in the other. I had 2 options. Pretend I knew nothing, stay silent, hope they pinned it all on Elliot, take control of the narrative, push it over the edge my way. I chose option 2. That Thursday, I typed up a 10-page dossier. It included a timeline document, IDs, transaction patterns, and a statement of intent. That I had in fact seen irregularities years ago, that I had attempted to flag them internally and was summarily terminated for reasons I now believed were fabricated. I didn't sign it. I didn't attach my name. Instead, I slid it into a secure envelope and left it anonymously on the managing partner's desk. Why? Because if Elliot taught me anything, it was that power doesn't come from being seen. It comes from being remembered at the right time. By Friday, the atmosphere at the firm had changed again. Less humming now, more snapping wires. The partner called a closed meeting. Forensics was brought in officially. A subpoena was drafted, and I overheard 3 words that made everything inside me sit still. Witness protection clause. They had enough. Or they were about to. I kept playing dumb. I asked questions at the right times. I offered to stay late to help sort archived files. I accidentally retrieved documents that added fuel to their investigation. And then came the moment that made everything real. I was called in not as a suspect, not as a file clerk, but as a key support witness in a pre-indictment briefing. Elliot's name was no longer being whispered. It was being printed on the front of folders in bold capital letters. The prosecutor assigned to the case was sharp young female glasses she kept pushing up her nose as she flipped pages too fast. She didn't smile when she looked at me. "I read your analysis," she said. I blinked. She tapped her folder. "The dossier, no return address, no signature. But you annotated like someone who knew what to look for. You want to tell me why?" I held her gaze for a long second, and then I said what I had practiced 100 times in the mirror. I used to work for him. He blamed me for something I didn't do. I've been watching ever since. She didn't nod. She didn't thank me. She just asked for more. More context. More documents. More connections. And I gave it to her. Carefully. Strategically. Because now it was no longer my plan alone. The machine was moving, and Elliot was standing on the tracks. I still hadn't spoken to him. I hadn't sent a message. Not a warning. Not a threat. Nothing. He had no idea who was behind the curtain. And that was the best part. The subpoena hit his desk on a Tuesday. I wasn't there to see it, of course. But I knew because that morning the tone of the emails changed. The partner who once joked about Elliot's Midas touch was now requesting detailed audits of every client his firm ever touched. The same HR director who once escorted me out in silence had now locked down external communications across the board. By noon, someone printed out the subpoena and left it accidentally or not on the edge of the mailroom counter. I caught the name stamped in black ink. Elliot Keene, defendant. I stared at it for just a second too long before turning away. I didn't smile. Not then. Not yet. The truth is, I wasn't after revenge in the way people imagine it. I didn't want to see him scream or cry or beg. That would make him the center again. This wasn't about him anymore. This was about finally standing on ground that didn't move beneath me. Still, when word reached me that he'd hired an aggressive defense attorney, one of those lean, pinstripe-suited types who throws paperweights in conference rooms, I knew the game wasn't over. It was just beginning. C. Elliot had one thing left: money. And money in the right hands can bury a lot of truth under layers of legal delay. But what he didn't realize was that I'd already moved past the legal surface. I'd gone after his foundation, his shell companies, his vendor trails, his false contractors. I had traced payments through dead LLCs with names like Ridgewater Holdings and Innovaris Systems, all leading back to one thing: personal withdrawals in cash. Elliot wasn't just clever, he was greedy. And greed makes people lazy. I brought that info to the lead investigator 2 days before the first pre-trial hearing, not because I had to, but because I wanted to show them something. I wasn't a victim anymore. The look she gave me wasn't gratitude. It was something better. Respect. We'll bring you in as a corroborating analyst. During testimony, she said. Under oath, I asked. She nodded. Under oath. Protected. Anonymous if requested. I requested anonymity, of course. Not because I was afraid, but because I wanted the moment to hit him harder. It would gnaw at him. Knowing someone from his past had helped orchestrate this and never showed their face. The first hearing was closed to the public, but transcripts still circulated internally, and I read them all. One line stuck with me. Mr. Keene, can you explain why these vendor payments were routed through companies that shared addresses with your personal residence? He stammered. They noted it. Another page. Another punch. Is it true that your firm reported a $2.3 million increase in Q4, when in fact the accounts showed a $400,000 deficit? Silence. And then, were you aware that your employee Mason Crowley was listed as the preparer of these reports, despite not having access to the final documents submitted to investors? Bullseye. I stared at that line for a long time. They said my name. In court, not as a criminal, not as an afterthought. As proof, that was the first moment I felt a chill deep in my ribs. Not fear, but something colder, sharper. The realization that justice might actually be real. That, all the time I spent watching, planning, waiting. It worked. He didn't go down that day. These things take time. But a court date was set. Discovery was opened. Depositions were scheduled. Elliot was no longer building his future. He was defending his past. I kept my role small but strategic. Every piece of evidence I released was timed, curated, and clean. I didn't overload the case. I fed it like a drip, just enough to keep the narrative unfolding exactly how I wanted. The final piece, a recording. Not mine. One I'd found buried in the metadata of an old shared company drive. A late-night meeting Elliot had recorded himself during a merger pitch. His voice laughing, literally saying the words. Honestly, just rounded up. They never read the footnotes anyway. The laughter from others followed. Nervous. Obedient. The file was titled Keene Temp Meeting. Peery. I emailed it to the DA's office. They subpoenaed it the next morning. When Elliot found out, he finally did something I didn't expect. He reached out, not directly, through a burner Gmail. No subject line. One sentence. You win. What do you want? I stared at the message for a while. I thought about replying, but I didn't. I just archived it. Permanently. That was the moment I smiled. Not the smug grin he once gave me. Not the crooked one he'd flashed while I was being fired. This smile was quiet, clean, real. Because sometimes the best response is silence. And sometimes the loudest laughter is the one they never hear. The first time I walked into the courtroom, I didn't walk in as Mason Crowley. I walked in as a third-party analyst. That's what the paperwork said. I wore a black blazer, no tie, hair neatly combed, no briefcase. Just a clipboard and a folder I didn't even open. I wasn't there to testify yet, just to observe. They didn't need to call me in right away. Elliot's defense was already wobbling. They were trying to paint the issue as a structural mismanagement, blaming lack of oversight, blaming automation, even trying to suggest that investors had been informed, they just didn't understand the technicals. But numbers don't lie, and Elliot had built his whole empire on doctored ones. The prosecutor's team had set the stage beautifully. A methodical unwrapping of years of audits, testimonies from junior employees, forensic data trails. They even brought in an ex-investor who described being gaslit and stonewalled after raising questions about quarterly discrepancies. Still, Elliot sat there smug. Chin up, suit crisp, but I could see it the flicker. Every time a document was introduced, he thought had been buried. His eye twitched. Every time they mentioned a date from 3 years ago, he tilted his head like he was trying to remember what the hell they were about to show. Because he couldn't predict what they had anymore. And that was the trap. See, he was a man who always needed control. Control over perception, conversation, outcome. But I'd stolen the one thing he never thought I'd touch. His certainty. By the second week, it was time. The prosecution asked to bring in a technical analyst who could verify the metadata timeline and logical connection between the files submitted and the fraudulent outcomes. That was me. They didn't introduce me by name at first. Just a title. Independent Financial Intelligence Consultant, which I wasn't technically. But in the world of court optics, that didn't matter. What mattered was the truth I was about to walk through. I stepped up to the witness stand, adjusted the mic, and met Elliot's eyes. It was the first time he recognized me. I saw the breath catch in his throat. He masked it quickly, but it was there. That half second of what the hell is he doing here? I kept my face calm. No emotion, no smirk. I wanted him to see me as something unfamiliar, something evolved, not a ghost from the past, a reckoning. Please state your name for the court, the DA asked. I paused, a beat too long. Then, Mason Crowley, a quiet gasp, not from the crowd, not from the judge, from him. Mr. Crowley, can you walk us through how you identified the manipulated data sets dated Q4 3 years ago? I did. Clearly, clinically, I explained the digital fingerprints Elliot had left behind, the mismatched timestamps, the discrepancies between internal records and external filings. I walked through how the fake shell companies didn't pass a standard financial triangulation test, how one LLC listed a P.O. box in Utah that didn't even exist. They let me speak for 20 minutes. Elliot's attorney objected twice, overruled both times. The final question, did you at any point falsify or fabricate any data submitted during your employment under Mr. Keene? My voice didn't shake. No. Were you aware your name was being used in falsified documents submitted to investors? No. I only learned of it after my termination when I reviewed backups of my own documentation. Thank you, Mr. Crowley. No further questions. When I stepped down, I didn't look at Elliot again. Not because I was afraid, because I didn't need to. I'd already seen what I came for. The crack. He slumped slightly now. His jaw clenched tighter. No more confident posture. No more playing the room. And in that courtroom in front of people who used to call him brilliant, he was just another man trying not to drown in a sea of his own lies. The trial lasted another 3 days. The last witness was a retired forensic accountant who corroborated everything I'd laid out. He praised the anonymous contributor who jump-started the investigation. He didn't know it was me. Not really. After the closing arguments, the court recessed. The jury deliberated for 2 full days. I didn't show up for the verdict. I didn't need to. I was already free. But later, I read the report. Guilty. On 5 counts of fraud, 2 counts of wire manipulation, 1 count of financial abuse of a fiduciary position. Sentencing deferred. Restitution required. And just like that, the man who once laughed while I was escorted out in disgrace was now facing 10 years behind bars. But I didn't celebrate. Not outwardly. Instead, I walked back to my apartment. Poured a drink, sat on the floor with the window cracked open and the night breeze blowing in, and I laughed. Not loud, not manic, not like a villain in a movie, just slow, quiet, from the chest, a single exhale of relief that tasted like victory. You see, revenge doesn't always come in fire and fury. Sometimes it comes in folders, in dates, in silence, and sometimes it comes in the sound of your enemies saying nothing because they finally can't. A week after the verdict, I received a letter. It wasn't from Elliot, not directly. It was from a law clerk, some junior associate I'd never met, sent on behalf of a concerned party currently undergoing sentencing preparation. Inside the envelope, a single typed sheet. There are things you don't understand, things that went beyond me. I wasn't the only one. No signature, no return address, just a coward's final gasp. I folded it once, dropped it in the shredder, and went back to slicing vegetables for dinner. Because here's what Elliot never understood. I didn't care about his story anymore, only mine. And mine was just beginning. For the first time in years, I felt clear. Clean. The kind of clarity you get after a long illness when food tastes better. The sun feels warmer and people stop looking at you like you're one step away from collapsing. Still, it wasn't all relief. Some parts of me had been restructured permanently. I'd become someone who noticed everything. A pause too long in a conversation. A lie wrapped in good intentions. An open tab on someone's laptop. You don't walk away from betrayal without scars, even invisible ones. But I wore mine differently now. They were no longer wounds. They were reminders. Reminders of what happens when you stop paying attention, of how fast a smile can turn into a blade, and how sometimes when you're buried deep enough, the only way out is to dig upward until you're holding the shovel. Still, people asked me, why didn't you just move on? Why waste years on revenge? My answer was always simple. Because I didn't want revenge. I wanted closure. There's a difference. Revenge is messy, loud. It's fire and screaming and chaos. Closure is clean. It's watching the truth come out in a courtroom. It's seeing the ones who hurt you face consequences, not because you screamed louder, but because you were patient, disciplined, deadly in your silence. Closure is walking away with your hands clean while theirs are in cuffs. I didn't follow the news about Elliot after that. I didn't need to. The public record was enough. It said everything I'd ever wanted to hear. But in private moments, when I passed by skyscrapers or stepped into lobbies that smelled like marble polish and dry erase markers, I sometimes thought about that day, the one where I was fired, where my career was taken from me, where a man smiled as I lost everything. And I'd whisper two words to myself, not anymore, because I had rebuilt. I'd taken my experience and started a consulting firm quietly off the grid. I specialized in forensic financial tracing, only took clients who'd been burned. I helped them see what I once couldn't, and I never used my real name on the website. I didn't need to. The people who needed me found me. My first client, a junior analyst who'd been forced to take the fall for her boss's insider trades. Sound familiar? We met in a cafe. She told me her story. I listened. Then I slid a folder across the table and said, "Let's take him apart." She blinked. "You've already started." I smiled. Started the day I read your email. It was happening again. Not to me, but to someone else. And I wasn't going to let her fall alone. I'd spent enough time in the dark. Now I build flashlights, and sometimes, if I'm being honest, sometimes I still see Elliot's face in my dreams. Not screaming, not begging, just confused. Like he's still trying to figure out how it all unraveled. How someone like me beat someone like him. And in those dreams, I do the same thing every time. I turn, walk away, and laugh. It wasn't long before word got out in circles that someone anonymous, efficient cold as winter, was quietly helping victims of financial manipulation build airtight cases. I never advertised. I never pitched. But referrals came, one after another, always through whispers, always from people with something to lose, and even more to recover. I worked under the name M. Gray, not flashy, not memorable. Just enough to pass as a signature, not an identity. My second client was a restaurant owner whose partner had drained accounts through fake vendor invoices. I tracked it all line by line, shell by shell, and walked the case to a clean settlement. No courtroom, no spectacle, just quiet justice. My third was a nurse whose retirement fund had been invested by her brother-in-law in a crypto scheme that never existed. I didn't just find where the money went, I helped her get every cent back. Each case reminded me this wasn't about Elliot anymore. It was about making sure no one else got blindsided by a smirk in a suit. And then it happened. The letter came in a plain envelope. No return address. Postmarked from a city I'd never visited. Inside was a single photo. Elliot, walking out of a halfway house. Same stiff posture. Same false confidence. But thinner now. Grayer. A man shaved down by consequence. The back of the photo had one handwritten line. He's out. There was no signature. No explanation. Just that I stared at the photo for a long time. Not because I feared him, because I felt nothing. No spike of rage. No desire to retaliate. No thrill. Just stillness. Because I knew something he didn't. I had moved on. He hadn't. He would live every day trying to rebuild a life built on lies, while I had built something real from ruins. Still, I was cautious. I updated all my operational protocols, reinforced digital anonymity, moved funds through cleaner channels. It was habit now, like breathing. Precaution, not paranoia, but something strange happened that week. I started writing again, not for clients, not for court. For me, I wrote about what it felt like to be torn down and rebuilt from bone and grit, about how humiliation can rot you or refine you, about the power of a plan executed slowly, deliberately, with no need for applause. I didn't publish it, not yet, but the words poured out, like they'd been waiting behind a dam. And then, one night as I was rereading a section about the trial, I caught myself laughing, not because of the courtroom, because of a memory. That day after I testified, after Elliot recognized me for the first time in years, he mouthed something. I'd forgotten it until just then. 3 words. "You set me up." He was wrong. I didn't set him up. He built the trap. I just gave it a name, pointed a flashlight at it, and let him walk into it like he always would. Because people like him never think they'll fall. They think the world is theirs by default. But when they fall, the silence is louder than the laughter ever was. And sometimes the quietest man in the room is the one who just handed you the shovel. There's a strange kind of freedom that comes after justice. It doesn't feel like fireworks. It feels like clean sheets in a locked door that finally stays shut. It feels like walking past glass towers and no longer flinching. But it also comes with questions. People wanted to know if I was going to press further, go after the others involved. The silent partners. The ones who looked the other way. Some had signed off on Elliot's schemes. Some had simply stood by and watched. And yes, I'd thought about it. I had names. I had timelines. I had enough to drag a few more suits down the stairs of the courthouse. But revenge has an edge like a knife. And if you press too far, you end up cutting yourself. I knew where the line was. And I had already crossed it once for a cause I could live with. Now it was about balance. So I built rules. Rule 1. Never take a case for personal payback. Rule 2. Always verify. Well, the client is clean before digging into the accused. Rule 3. If the only reason to say yes is because I can say no. These rules weren't for others. They were for me. To protect what I'd built, not just professionally, but mentally, emotionally. Because the Mason who once burned with anger was gone. And in his place stood someone far more dangerous. A man who knew how to wait. How to watch, and how to walk away when the damage was already done. One evening, I got a call from a client who'd just settled a massive financial recovery against her ex-husband, a man who'd locked her out of their joint accounts, moved funds offshore, and swore she'd never see a cent. I'd helped her trace it all. Quietly, legally. She cried on the phone, told me she finally felt like herself again. Before hanging up, she asked me something no one had asked before. Do you ever get tired of it? I paused. Then, no, because I'm not chasing revenge anymore. I'm chasing justice. She didn't say anything, but she understood. The next morning I got a delivery, a leather-bound notebook monogrammed C. Inside the first page was a quote in clean gold ink. The truth is rarely loud, but it's always final. No sender name, just a soft gesture, and I couldn't help but smile. That day, I walked past my old office building, just once. No detour. The marble lobby still gleamed. The receptionist was someone new. The glass elevator carried people up to floors that used to hold my dreams. I stood there for a moment, just long enough to remember, and then I walked on, because ghosts only haunt the ones who haven't moved forward, and I had miles ahead. Later that night, I wrote a letter, not to send, just for me. To the man who laughed when I fell, I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I refuse to carry you any further. I folded it, burned it in the sink, watched the smoke curl into nothing. And then I laughed, not bitter, not triumphant, just free, because when you're finally done burying the past, there's nothing left to do but build something beautiful where it used to stand. I didn't expect the call. It came one morning as I was reviewing a client file mid-sip of my second coffee, the sun barely lifting above the skyline. Blocked number. Straight to voicemail. But the message, you don't know me, but I knew him. Elliot, he talked about you after everything. Said you ruined his life. Said you were the ghost he could never trace. Click. That was it. No name, no explanation. Just a voice calm, maybe even admiring. I sat there for a full minute. Phone still in my hand, the message echoing in my skull. You were the ghost he could never trace. Funny. I didn't feel invisible. I felt sharper than I ever had. But I knew what they meant. Elliot had lived the last years of his life post-trial, trying to piece together how he'd lost, not just legally but strategically. His world didn't collapse from explosions. It quietly eroded like rot in a foundation he thought was granite. And that kind of undoing, it haunts a man more than any headline ever could. Still, that voicemail raised something in me I hadn't felt in a while. Curiosity. Who else had known what he did? Who else had profited while I paid the price? I told myself I'd let it go, but I didn't. Instead, I reopened my own file, not for vengeance. For clarity, I created a chart. Elliot's known partners, former associates, investors, friends who'd vouched for him. Cross-referenced it against shell corporations, off-record contracts, donor lists. One name circled back. A firm partner from our old company, retired quietly 2 months after my firing. Bought a property in Switzerland. Never returned to the States. On the surface, clean. But I had a feeling. I pulled travel logs, tax records, public filings. Buried in a holding company was a fund listed under a false advisory group, one that matched transfers found in Elliot's fraudulent accounts. This man, this mentor figure, was Elliot's silent handler all along. I stared at the printout. It was enough to build a case, enough to light a fire under everything again. But instead of calling a lawyer, I closed the file. I didn't need it. Because winning isn't just about what you can prove. It's knowing what no longer deserves your time. He was a man living in exile. Elliot was a man broken in court, and I was a man on his own terms, with no leash, no overseer, no need for applause. That's the difference between them and me. They needed power to feel alive. I only needed truth. And the truth is, I won. Without screaming, without begging, without lowering myself. I won in silence. In shadows, and in the softest kind of justice there is. Peace. Sometimes I wonder what Elliot thought the moment the gavel came down. Not just guilty, but everything that led to it. The whispers behind closed doors. The evidence he never saw coming. The people he thought were loyal who didn't even show up. He must have replayed every move like a chess match gone wrong. And what haunted him most, not the trial, not the sentence. Me, the one he underestimated. The one he didn't see until I was already walking out of the courtroom. I imagine him sitting in that courtroom chair suit, slightly wrinkled from hours of testimony, realizing too late that I was never the pawn. I was the player. But I didn't need to be there for the checkmate. The prosecutor once told me in passing, "You're the cleanest kind of dangerous." At the time I laughed, but now I see what she meant. Because there are people who explode when wronged, who make noise, burn bridges, scream into the wind, hoping to be heard. And then there are people like me, people who document, who memorize, who let silence sharpen until it slices without warning. What Elliot never understood is that reputation isn't built by volume, it's built by velocity, by how fast someone can pivot from being buried to becoming the hand behind the curtain. I moved on from his shadow, but it never moved on from me. In the months after the trial, I received 2 more messages. One from a former employee of Elliot's, asking if I'd consider helping them clean up their name. The second from a journalist sniffing around for a podcast series about revenge with receipts. I declined both. I wasn't a spectacle. And this wasn't a brand. It was a closed chapter. Still, I couldn't help myself from checking public records one last time. That retirement account Elliot once boasted about in meetings. Gone. The house he bought with off-books money foreclosed, and the firm disbanded. Their official statement cited irreparable reputational damage. 3 lines, 10 years of his work, reduced to a footnote in a legal notice. And somewhere in that collapse, my name wasn't mentioned once. Not because I wasn't involved, but because I'd done it right. I left no trail, just truth. That's what makes the best revenge so quiet. It leaves no fingerprints, only ripples. And eventually those ripples grow into waves that swallow everything built on lies. I kept the USB that started it all, not for nostalgia, but as proof that the smallest thing, one folder, one overlooked file, can shift an entire life. It's locked away now, in a safe, alongside my original termination letter and the unsigned apology I once drafted but never sent. Because I didn't need closure in someone else's words. I wrote my own. And now every time someone tells me their story, the betrayal, the collapse, the need to rebuild, I offer them only one thing, a pen, to write theirs. Because mine already ended. And it ended in a courtroom where the only thing louder than Elliot's silence was the sound of justice finally arriving. It's strange the places that become sacred after trauma. For me, it was a corner cafe downtown. Nothing special. 4 tables chipped, tile bitter coffee. But it had a cracked window facing the courthouse. That's where I sat the morning of Elliot's sentencing. Not inside the courtroom. Not among the press. Just there with a cup of something hot steam curling up into the quiet, watching from a distance. I watched him walk in, flanked by 2 lawyers. Jacket stiff, shoulders high, pretending the outcome hadn't already been etched into the walls. He didn't look around. Didn't pause. That was the thing about Elliot. He never slowed down. Not when he stole. Not when he betrayed. Not even when the walls began to crack. But that day he looked slower. Like a man who finally knew he wouldn't be walking out the same door he entered. The sentence? 7 years. 3 minimum. Restitution to multiple parties. Frozen assets. Travel restrictions. Professional bans. The court summary made it sound clinical. But the look in his eyes as he left the building, that wasn't clinical. That was a man unraveling. And me, I sipped my coffee. No smile. No gloating. Because justice, when it finally lands, doesn't feel like thunder. It feels like quiet. The kind that settles into your bones and reminds you, you did it. You made it out, and you didn't have to scream to be heard. After sentencing, I walked the long way home, passed by the bench where I once sat, jobless, humiliated, scrolling through rejection emails, passed by the alley where I'd once cried behind a dumpster, clutching a severance envelope I couldn't bear to open. Passed by the old glass building, his building now. Under new management, the lobby remodeled, the brass nameplate gone. History wiped clean, except in memory. Mine. I got home, took off my coat, sat at my desk and opened the folder one last time. Inside were 3 things. A copy of my original analyst license, revoked after the scandal, now reissued under a new certification. The court's statement of restitution. My name not listed as a victim, but as a contributor to evidence integrity. A letter, typed, folded, signed. Well, you were better than me. I see that now. I don't expect forgiveness. I just hope this ends with you finding peace. I stared at it. Then I burned it. Not out of rage, out of finality, because I had found peace, not in his words, but in mine. Not in his fall, but in my rise. Later that night, I walked out to the balcony. The city breathed below me, and I whispered something not to Elliot. To myself, I am not who I was when I fell. Because I wasn't. I was the man who waited, who built the case, who didn't flinch when the lights turned on. And most of all, I was the man who laughed last. The world doesn't celebrate quiet victories. There are no parades for people who outthink instead of outshout. No medals for patience. No trophies for walking away from a fire you could have lit. But I didn't need those things. Because I knew what I'd done, what I'd endured, what I'd survived. And survival in my case wasn't just about breathing. It was about reclaiming control of the narrative. There's something powerful about watching people try to rewrite your story and then taking the pen back. I thought about that a lot when I started consulting full-time. I never advertised. Didn't need to. My name had become a password in certain circles. People whispered it over drinks at conferences and support groups. Gray helped me. He doesn't promise miracles. He just listens, connects dots, finds truth others miss, and he does it without judgment. My clients came from all walks of life. A mother whose husband funneled their mortgage payments into his mistress's startup. A junior architect framed for leaking designs to a competitor. A scholarship student accused of plagiarizing her thesis when it was actually stolen by a professor. Each case was different, but the pattern was always the same. Power misused, trust broken, truth buried. I didn't promise revenge. I promised clarity, and most of the time, that was enough. But every so often, someone would sit across from me and ask, "How do you do it without losing your soul?" I'd smile slow and soft, and answer honestly, I already lost it once. I just made sure I got it back better. It wasn't about punishment anymore. It was about realignment. Helping people stand in rooms that once felt like battlefields and feel tall again. Eliot used to say you can't undo a fall, but that was where he was wrong. You can't undo the moment, but you can control what you build after it. And me, I built a fortress out of the rubble. I reinforced it with boundaries, values, and silence. The kind of silence that doesn't scream for attention, but demands respect. Years passed. People stopped asking about Eliot, stopped bringing up the trial. It faded from headlines, from dinner table conversations. But for me, it was never about being remembered. It was about being respected by the only person whose opinion mattered, my own. And every night when I lay my head down, I know this. I did not let the worst thing that ever happened to me define me. I defined it, then I dismantled it. Then I built something stronger in its place. And that's the real revenge. There was one final thread I hadn't pulled, not out of fear, out of choice. A storage unit rented under an old alias I used during the darkest part of my life. It held the physical artifacts from that time. Old laptops, stacks of court printouts, a cork board with red threads still pinned between timelines and transaction codes. My war room. Untouched for nearly 2 years. One rainy evening, I drove there alone. No plan, just a quiet need to see it one last time. The lock clicked open with the same stiff resistance. Inside, the air smelled of old dust and paper. I flipped on the light. There it was, a time capsule of a man at his most dangerous, not because he was angry, but because he was strategic. Each pin, each folder, each note, it was all part of the storm that had once wrecked a life mine. And then, piece by piece, sank the man who started it. I stood there, hands in pockets, just looking. And then, one by one, I began to take it down. Not dramatically, not ceremonially, just methodically, like closing a file after the job is done. Because Eliot had been sentenced. His firm dissolved. His reputation buried. And me, I was alive, free, building something real, one client at a time. It was time to let go of the relics. I packed the files into boxes marked shred, pulled the pins from the board, wiped down the table where I once mapped betrayal like a battlefield. The only thing I kept, the USB and a small photograph of me taken the day after I won my first post-trial case. I looked different, older, yes, but grounded, healed. When I locked the storage unit for the final time, I didn't feel sadness. I felt light. The kind of lightness that comes after shedding a version of yourself that once needed armor just to get through the day. That night back home, I poured a glass of scotch, sat on my balcony, watched the traffic slide past in streams of amber and red. And I thought about the irony. Eliot had laughed when I fell, but in the end, his laughter faded. Mine didn't, because mine wasn't about winning. It was about becoming, and becoming takes time, discipline, patience. It's quiet, unseen, until the day it's undeniable. The world may not know what I did, but I know. And more importantly, he knew. I never went to visit him in prison. People asked if I would. Said things like, "Don't you want to see his face?" Hear him admit it. But no, because I didn't need his words. I had his silence. The trial transcripts, the court's verdict, his folded posture during sentencing. That was all the confession I'd ever require. Still, I received a letter, mailed through the prison system, typed, double-spaced, clean, almost professional. It started with, "Mason, if you're reading this, then I guess you won." And it went on for 3 pages. No direct apology. No accountability, not really. Just reflections, half excuses, half regrets. He wrote about pressure, how the job changed him, how he thought he was doing what everyone else did just better. He talked about the fear of becoming irrelevant, the hunger to stay on top, the belief that bending the rules wasn't really breaking them until it was. Then one line stopped me cold. "I thought you'd never fight back, Mason. You were too quiet, too polite, too clean." That was the moment I knew I'd won more than a case. I'd rewritten how he saw me. I wasn't the silent analyst anymore. I was the strategist. The ghost. Oh, the man he couldn't predict. I folded the letter. Didn't burn this one. I stored it. Filed under closure. Not because it meant anything, but because it didn't have to. Somewhere inside me, I had carried the weight of his smirk, the one from that HR room the day they escorted me out. But not anymore. That smirk was gone now, replaced by a signature on a letter he never thought he'd write. He had once destroyed me with a lie. Now he tried to explain himself with the truth. Funny, isn't it? How justice isn't always a courtroom gavel. Sometimes it's a sentence typed on cheap paper mailed from a place with bars on every window. After that letter, I moved on again. Subtly, cleanly. I closed 2 final cases that month. Referred future clients to trusted contacts. Booked a trip, not for business. For rest. I found a cabin upstate, isolated, pine-lined, quiet enough to hear your own breath. And there, without clients, cases, or ghosts, I let it all go. The shame, the anger, even the pride. Because revenge is loud. Justice is quieter. But peace is silent. And for the first time in years, I slept through the night without dreaming of courtrooms, cubicles, or elevator betrayals. Just wind in trees, just breath, just me. There's something sacred about a story ending on your own terms, not with an explosion, not with applause. Just closure, clean, simple, whole. I didn't return to my old industry, didn't start a firm, didn't write a book. The truth is, I didn't need to be seen anymore. I had become exactly who I was always meant to be. Someone who listens carefully, moves quietly, and builds justice where no one else looks. The world forgot Elliot, forgot the trial, forgot the scandal. But I remembered, not out of spite, out of principle. Because forgetting is what let people like him rise in the first place. And I promised myself this. As long as I'm here, someone will always remember the truth. It's in the way I mentor now discreetly online through encrypted platforms. In the way I teach young professionals how to protect themselves. Not just legally, but emotionally. How to spot a smirk like Elliot's before it turns into a noose. I don't speak his name anymore. Not because I'm afraid to. Because he no longer deserves to occupy space in my life. He's a chapter. I'm the author. And in that final chapter I walked away, not broken, but rebuilt, stronger, smarter, quieter. And if there's anything you take from this story, whether you've been betrayed, silenced, or discarded, let it be this. You don't need to burn everything down to be free. You don't need to scream to be heard. You only need to keep receipts. Hold your breath a little longer. And remember, revenge is loud. Justice is patient. But peace is surgical. And I never wanted to be famous. I just wanted the truth to speak for itself. It did. And when the world went quiet again, when the noise faded, when the last signature was signed, and the last account was closed, I laughed, not because I won, but because I ended it, on my terms, in my time, with my soul intact. And that's the only victory that matters. He laughed when I fell. I laughed louder at his trial. Mason Crowley's life is shattered when a trusted colleague, Elliot Keene, orchestrates his public downfall. Once a rising analyst, Mason is fired, humiliated, and left in ruins until a forgotten USB sparks the slow, deliberate journey toward justice, transforming himself into a behind-the-scenes investigator. Mason uncovers a web of financial fraud hidden behind Elliot's charm and success. With quiet precision, he rebuilds his credibility, infiltrates the legal system, and feeds prosecutors evidence that leads to Elliot's downfall, without ever revealing his hand until the moment mattered most. But this isn't a story of revenge through rage. It's a lesson in strategic patience. Mason doesn't scream, threaten, or chase validation. He documents, he listens, he waits, and in the silence, he finds his voice not in vengeance, but in quiet victories that reshape the lives of others too. As Elliot is sentenced and forgotten, Mason walks away with more than redemption. He walks away with peace, a gripping narrative of betrayal recovery and surgical retribution. This story reminds us, you don't need to make noise to change everything. You just need to know where the cracks already are and press. Subscribe to the channel for more true told karmic stories where justice arrives not in flames, but in silence.